Welcome back to the show. For those of you just tuning in, my guest today is author Ronald J. Ricardo. Ronald is stopping by the Author Chat Show to discuss his book, Organization Design, and we're going to also discuss his company, Catalyst Consulting Group. Ronald, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ronald. It is wonderful to have you on the show. Since this is your first time coming on the Author Chat Show, why don't we get started with you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've got about 30 years of experience. About one-third of it is being a corporate executive at Johnson & Johnson and then at Fidelity Investments. At J&J, I was part of their corporate consulting group, so I did a lot of work on business transformation, M&A, major changes to business model, restructuring. And then at Fidelity, I was a VP, headed up their L&OD function for their largest OpCo. And then I was also in the Big Five, where I helped start up a strategy and change practice. And then after that, I founded the Catalyst Consulting Group. So over the years, it's about 30 years. I've done consulting in about 140 companies now. And those companies have traversed a wide range of industries and have ranged from startups to emerging companies to turnarounds to very, very large Fortune 10 companies.
Okay. Ronald, let me ask you this. Has your business picked up a little bit with more and more older people leaving the workforce and starting their own businesses? Have you seen an increase there?
Interesting question. Yeah, the answer is yes. Different services that we have. We do three groups of services. We help companies grow, we improve their performance, and then we do some of the HR because there's 10 people in the group. And so relative to what you're talking about, the growth, the strategic planning, we're finding an upturn in that. I think that's a function of general economic conditions. I think a lot of people that are in their 40s and 50s have also been displaced from corporate jobs, and
right.
Many of them have turned to doing something entrepreneurial, starting their own company. So I think that's probably the two major drivers that we've seen.
And honestly, I think it's something that's really great for our country because when you have new startups, you have new ideas that are circulating out here in the marketplace. So for those of you that are listening, because I know a lot of my listening audience is made up of entrepreneurs, even those that are authors are actually entrepreneurs, especially if you're doing most of your marketing and promotion for your book. So this is something this is a show that you really want to listen to because not only has Ronald written books about organization design, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but like you said, you're actually you've been out here actually growing businesses. So tell us, Ronald, what are some of the things that we need to know to how to when it comes to growing or improving the performance of our businesses?
Sure. I think, what we've seen over the years is perhaps it's a function of our schooling. Maybe the curriculums have lagged. Maybe it's a function of maybe some of the volatility in the economy. But I've seen over the last few years, in a sense, a lot less people at senior levels, whether they be entrepreneurs or even big company execs, not having very strong strategic thinking or strategic planning skills. So I think the first thing is to, develop some of those strategic thinking skills and come up with a construct and match it to the size and the rigor of your business. If you're a mom and pop startup, you don't need to be creating something, you use an atom bomb to kill an ant, using that analogy. But you want to be able to start with, what decisions do I want to make if you want to grow your business? Is it what offerings? What are my products and services? Am I service-focused or product and service-focused? Who are my customers? How do I price? How do I position? How do I differentiate myself in a meaningful way? That sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but often that requires some level of thinking, having a network to bounce that off if you don't have employees, and also to collect data to kind of go through a sanity check. A lot of us have a gut feel, and sometimes the gut feel is spot on, and then every now and then we're surprised. We say, wow, we were operating under a set of assumptions that may not be totally correct.
Right. That is so true. And this is why you'll sometimes find surveys. Like sometimes you go into your favorite store, retail store, and they've got surveys out. This is part of this process that Ronald is discussing. So, Ronald, tell us again, what are some of the challenges that you see for businesses now, and what are some of the solutions that you talk to companies about overcoming these challenges?
Sure. Well, if we're talking primarily smaller entrepreneurial companies, the challenges for them tend to be a little bit different than from the larger, more established firms. But one of the primary challenges is, how do I grow my brand? How do I get my name out in the marketplace? What are the channels of marketing I need to use? And how do I do that when I have limited resources? Because I'm in a startup mode or I'm in a heavy growth mode and I have to watch where I invest my money. So I think that's critical. I think having a balance, what do I mean by that? Think of marketing as in LA, a multi-lane highway. And many people focus on only one or two lanes. The answer is, I'm going to do internet-based marketing. I'm going to put ads. Well, the reality is you probably want to think through and have a channel.
That is so true, especially when it comes to internet ads. I do those sometimes. I don't know how much experience you've had with them, Ronald, but you really have to think out what type of campaign you're interested in running before you just jump out there and throw something out as an ad, because even though you're not spending as much as you used to, I grew up sort of like in the show Mad Men business. Actually, my first job was with a huge advertising company here in the Midwest. And I tell you, what you would pay for advertising, even something like this show would have cost you an arm and a leg, basically, especially if you were a small startup business. So the things that we have, the resources that we have available now, Ronald, like you were talking like with ads, tell us how you talk to businesses about, especially the older entrepreneurs, about using social media to promote their business. Do you do a lot of that?
Yeah. One of the things that it can be challenging, particularly for people who are, in their 40s and beyond. They may not be as astute, either with their computer skills or with their internet savviness, but you can get overwhelmed. I mean, think about it. You think of digital marketing. You think of social media. There's like virtually many sites. Is it Facebook? Is it Google Plus? Is it Yelp? Is it Twitter? Is it Instagram? Is it YouTube? Right? You get overwhelmed in acronyms and words and trying to figure out which is the right channel for the audience you want to reach, and ultimately the strategy that you have in the messaging. That is incredibly challenging, even for people like you and I who've got a little bit of gray hair and have been down this path several times. So I think you've really raised a very salient point, and that is, not to get overwhelmed, to really do your homework, and to start with your business strategy, how you want to grow the business, who are truly your end buyers, and then what are the best channels to reach those end buyers. Exactly.
Now, you sponsored a research project to help identify the top 10 leadership attributes. Tell us about that.
Sure. Interesting. As I said earlier, I've done work with a lot of different companies, and to be perfectly honest with you, over the last 10 years, I've seen, particularly at the larger companies, what I would call a dumbing down of senior executives. And I wanted to understand, is this an anomaly? What's the cause of it? So I started with, why am I seeing this? And I believe it's a function of a lot of our talent management systems. Well, what do I mean by that? let me give you an example. When I was an executive at Fidelity, I was the only person who was an Ivy League. That doesn't happen by accident. That tells you that they're looking for a certain pedigree. So I think what's happening in the larger companies, and it spills down, is, people are looking for the silver bullet. Just get me somebody out of Procter & Gamble, thinking everyone out of Procter & Gamble is a marketing guru. Just get me somebody who's a leader out of GE, and we're okay. So they look for a pedigree, company pedigree, educational pedigree. They have to have a PhD. They have to have this. I think the second thing is, too often with large companies, people are promoted, and this is politically incorrect, but it's based on their ability to manage relationships. So the best and the brightest don't necessarily end up at the very, very top, but often the people at the very top are the ones who are able to manage upward and are able to, create relationships with the senior-most executives, and they kind of get pulled along as that executive gets pulled along. So I think part of the dumbing down is the way we're going about selecting people, and that's kind of filtered down to the smaller companies, and it's a problem. So I wanted to interview people that were considered high performers, and we interviewed about 220 of them. And we were asking questions to try to isolate what separates, I'll use this analogy, the people who walk on water from the people who are treading water, from the people from a performance problem who are underwater and drowned. And we came up with some things that are probably counter to what most people would think. For example, there's been so many books written in the last 15 years about leadership. And I think sometimes, way too often, people defer to a consensus model. Lynda, you've managed people. I've managed lots of people. And you want to be involved, you want to engage, but you can't forget that if you are the boss, you own 51% of the vote. And business is not, in my opinion, about voting and the ayes have it. There are times when you say, look, I heard what you said, but here's what we're going to do. So the best leaders were ones that knew when to collect input, but ultimately not to defer or abrogate their responsibility and make tough decisions. Two, what we found was the best leaders were not worried about being liked. I'd be honest with you, I was never concerned about my direct reports liking me. I was much more concerned about them saying he honored his commitments, he treated people fairly, he had high performance standards. But if you're so focused on being liked, you really avoid making a tough decision. I've done work at GE, and one of the executives that I grew fond of said to me, and I remember this fondly, he says, show me an executive who everybody likes, and I'll show you an executive who's never made a tough decision. Jack Welch was not a loved man at GE, but he was a very effective leader. So I think, not being overly focused on being able to make a tough decision, being strategically open, being able to think strategically, but having very, very good executional skills. Lynda, let me pose a question to you. You and I have been around the block. How many people have you met, senior executives, who are really good at the napkin exercise, visioning, thinking big picture, but couldn't execute? I'm sure you've seen that in your career many times, right?
Absolutely. And so much of what you're saying is really striking a nerve, because I'm still working in corporate America as I do this on the side. And, oh, my goodness, the dumbing down of our executives. It seems, Ronald, what I see is, like you said, those that get along, that know how to play the relationship game, are the ones that are going to always get promoted. These are the ones that a lot of the executives feel comfortable with. And like you said, as they move up the ladder, they're bringing along, as they used to call them, their dream team. So I totally relate to what you're saying, and I totally agree with what you're saying as well. And yes, it's very difficult out here now to deal with some of the things that are going on in corporate America. And I believe, Ronald, this is why we're seeing so much discord in our political system, because the little man, the ones that actually have to deal with this work environment, we're the ones that are suffering as we're dealing with leaders that are really not leaders. They're more yes men. This is what we're seeing here on my end.
Yeah, it's a very astute observation. You know, I think so often people who are in leadership roles are risk averse. You know, they don't want to accept responsibility, and you know, I think that's where it all starts. I mean, I was facilitating a strategic planning meeting for a pharmaceutical company, and this is the president and his direct reports. Everybody at that table was making high six figures, you know, 6, 7, 800,000 up to several million. And they kept talking about they. And finally I interjected. I said, guys, the only people with regards to this organization above you is God. You're they. The decisions you make affect everybody else. You have to start taking responsibility for good decisions and bad decisions. Now, that sounds intuitively obvious, but I don't know if you've experienced this concept of abrogation.
Oh, yeah.
It can be very frustrating.
Oh, my God. I've actually had supervisors, Ronald, that love to wear the title, oh, I'm the supervisor. But when a problem arose, and a customer wanted to speak directly to the supervisor, oh, my goodness, here comes the lies. Here comes the ducking and dodging. I actually had one that flat out told me, I'm not taking that call.
Well, you know, I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day. We're in the process of redoing our website. And the entrepreneur is a person who does website design and digital marketing. And they flub something. And much to my satisfaction, I got a phone call, and the person said, you know, I made a mistake. I didn't honor a commitment. I apologize for this, and I hope we can get by this and build a relationship. And you know something? I got back to that person, and I said, you know, what you did from a value standpoint really, really impressed me. Instead of you know, insulting my intelligence, you looked me in the eye, proverbially, and said, look, I made a mistake. I own it. And can we get by it? I mean, that's really where we need to be, I think, in leadership, values-driven.
Right. Exactly. And when you say that, mean that. Because it's so easy for people to put labels, oh, yeah, we're very value-driven here. We honor, we're very diverse. And you get in there, and it's totally not any of that.
Well said. You know, look, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, this is why books like yours are very important, Ronald. And we haven't had a chance to really get into your book, and we're almost, believe it or not, out of time. So tell us a little bit about, because what I did was I kind of referred everybody to your website, the Catalyst Group, and you have your books on there. So let's get started by talking very briefly, if you don't mind, about the 3 books that we have featured on your that you have featured on your website, that we have featured on your Blog Talk Player, so that listeners can see the books that you have written. So let's start off by telling us a little bit about your book, Teams. Who needs them and why?
Sure. You know, all of the books that I've written, and I've actually written 8 now, and about 70 articles, all of them are really practitioner focus, all of them. You know, and if you look at the genesis, Lynda, it's often what I found was a client, a business would have a business challenge. We need to get teamwork. We need to look at our org structure. We need to grow the business, you know, per our conversation today. And often they would go and they'd either take courses at their local college or they would buy a book. And often the books or the material was very conceptual, very ethereal, and you might, nod your head and say, yeah, that makes sense. And then you go back to your desk or your office on Monday and say, so what exactly do I need to do? So
right.
The Teams book, the org design book, the change management book, all of them, they're all methodologically driven, not from the perspective of, being overly academic. They're not. They're practitioner. They're based on work with and research of many companies. So it's here's step one. Scaling the approach from a simple company to a much more complex company. So think of the approach as having multiple pathways, and think of each book is not only telling you the what, but the how, tools. So if we're talking about teams, the team book, there's tools on how to determine what's the right type of team. Is it cross-functional? Is it self-directed? There are tools on how to design a team. There's tools on how to come up with team metrics. There's tools on how to evaluate an existing team. There's surveys. There's focus groups. The same thing with org design. How do you assess your current structure? How do you select or pare down alternative structures? How do you do detailed implementation? Same thing with strategic planning. So they tend to be very tool-driven. It tends to be very how-to practitioner-driven and very data-driven.
Okay, great. And you use these tools, Ronald, when you actually meet with corporate companies or corporations that are having issues. Can you tell us, if you don't mind name dropping, some of the corporations that you've had an opportunity to work with?
Sure. On the big side, let's pick life sciences. I've worked with Pfizer, about 15 or 20 different Johnson & Johnson companies, Sandoz, Novartis. On the utility side, Pennsylvania Power and Light, Southern Cal Edison, PP&L. On the financial services side, Fidelity, Aetna. On manufacturing, we've done work in consumer packaged goods like Schick Wilkinson Swords, Stanley Works. Done work in professional services, a company called the Affinion Group. We've done work with private equity. So all of our people are just like you and I, Lynda. They're all senior people. They've either been partners of the major companies, consulting, or they've been former executives of either entrepreneurial or large companies. So how we really differentiate is when I was in the Big Five, people like you and I would be a partner, but people who did the work were kids 2 years removed from sneakers, the MBAs. In our group, you're dealing peer-to-peer. You're dealing with somebody who has a track record across multiple industries, across multiple functions, across multiple size companies. So if you're a president and you're facing off, you're dealing with somebody who's, in their 40s and 50s, who's had, a track record of 25 plus years. And that's how we differentiate.
Wonderful. Tell us, we're down to our last 90 seconds. Tell us, Ronald, how can our listening audience connect with you online?
Well, you can certainly go to our website. It's Catalyst, CATALYST, consultinggroup.org. Clearly, if you go to a place like Amazon, you can certainly Google me, and you will see, the 8 books I've written, and probably a good portion of the articles are in public domain. We're in the process of updating our website, and the new one should be out in a couple of weeks, and it will have new functionality. It'll talk about some of the public speaking I've done in keynotes. It will show that I've been interviewed at places like Associated Press, CNBC, CBS, Harvard Business Review. It'll show me clips of me on television shows and radio shows. So that functionality will be on the new website that should come out in a couple of weeks.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, before I let you go, one of the things that you have in your press kit is this comment: the state of the economy and how to improve it. Well, right now, I believe it's China that's having a their systems are beginning to fall apart again. Very quickly, Ronald, can you tell us what can we do to improve our economy with our own small businesses? Because what I have is a small business, and I'd like to know what kind of patterns I should look for in the economy so that way I can make sure that I keep my business where it needs to be. Does that make sense?
It sure does. A tough question to answer, but let me try to generalize it and also make it useful. One is you need to understand how your business makes money and understand the math. Prime example, how many times do you there's a well-known television show called Shark Tank. And many of your listeners have probably seen Shark Tank, where you have people who are entrepreneurs who go and have these super rich people they're making offers to with the idea of trying to get some revenue, some money, some capital. And often these people cannot answer questions about what are my margins, what's my top line, which product is most profitable, which customer is most profitable, which one should I be getting rid of. So the first thing is understand your numbers, understand how you make money. 2, it's not how much money you make top line, it's how much money you make that go to the bottom line, profitability. Right. There is a thing called a defined benefit plan. And if you've been in business for a few years, it allows you legally to be able to put away pre-tax money. So if you're making $250,000 a year, you could set aside, based on some actuarial tables, a percentage of that pre-tax. So illustratively, if you're making $250 and you put away $50, you're now being taxed at $200. Exactly. So it's not how much money you gross, it's how much money you net. And then the third thing I would recommend to folks is to be politically active. And remember, most of our politicians are career politicians. You may love or hate Donald Trump. But he's run a business. He understands how to make money. Most politicians know how to run a bureaucracy. That's very, very different than growing a business.
Yes. We are going to be living through some interesting times if he becomes president. So, honestly, this is a very exciting time to be involved in this process, just to see which way we go. Because, Ronald, and again, we're already off the air, so I'm just going to say this very quickly and let you go. We've allowed it to work the way that the politicians tried it. It's not working. So maybe we do need another model. That's all I'm saying.
Lynda, I was on TV about a month ago, and it was all about politics. And they asked me, they said, I want you to be a provocative person. And they said, give me 5 things that you would do to change the political system. I said, number 1, get rid of both parties. Because no one party is completely right. And you look at whether you're a Democrat or there's things I like about both. And there's things I hate about both. Right?
Exactly.
But now you have pressure. You're a Democrat. You have to vote. They're like little children. You go State of the Union. Obama says something, the Democrats clap, and the Republicans sit there like they're at a funeral. I mean, it's the most childish thing.
It really is. It really is.
And I think we should get rid of term limits. You're there for a period of time and you're out, as opposed to I'll do anything to get reelected.
Right. That's right.
These things are very politically, sensitive. There's people that have very strong feelings one way or the other. And I think, sometimes we need to rethink our underlying assumptions. That's where I'm coming from. Does that make sense to you, or you have a better idea?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You're so speaking to everything that I have spoken about, seriously, in public and in private. You're right. You're hitting it right there. You're nailing it right there, Ronald.
Before I leave you, I grew up poor. 1,200 square foot house with 1 bathroom.
Sure.
And my parents sacrificed, for my sister and I to do well. I'm blessed. I work because I want to work. I live in a 6,000 square house, right? But I haven't forgotten where I've come from. But the real learning is we as people have to take responsibility for our decisions. If you make bad ones, well, then you have to suffer for that. If you quit high school and you have no education, well, the answer is you're going to make a little amount of money unless you do something entrepreneurial.
Exactly.
And I think that's something we've gotten away from. We've gotten into this mode of let's tax the hell out of somebody like you who's done really well. And let's give it to somebody who maybe has made some bad decisions. Now, I'm not suggesting if somebody's had bad luck, hey, let's help them. But if somebody's made bad decisions, I'm not sure redistribution of wealth works from my standpoint.
Well, you know what? That's truly not the solution. I think everybody should pay their fair taxes, their fair share. But really, what's considered their fair share? One thing that I'm also for is a flat tax rate because it makes no sense that I get taxed at a higher rate than somebody like Warren Buffett, basically because he has more assets than I do.
I mean, my son goes to private school, elementary school. I pay almost $40,000 a year for that.
Wow.
And I don't get a tax break for that.
Exactly.
And I'm still paying. If you don't give me a tax break, then maybe you just give me a credit for the money I would have given to public school to make it fair. No.
Wow.
And where
and
I
not
live,
only
the private
that, now,
good.
Right. And Ronald, the sad thing about that is you're paying college tuition, and he's not even in college yet.
Absolutely well said.
Right.
So look, Lynda, you're a very nice person. Offline, if I can ever help you with my network, please don't hesitate to give me a call. You've got my contact information. And, maybe there's, I'm not sure exactly what your full business is on the side, but there might be opportunities for us to work together. Feel free to seek me out if you feel there's an opportunity there.
Sounds good, sweetheart. Listen, we got to go. We got to wrap this up. That's our show for today. Thank you again for coming on, telling us about your books, your company. You have been a great guest, and we're looking forward to having you back on the show, Ronald. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. All right, and that was author, entrepreneur Ronald J. Ricardo. And, again, we discussed his books. He's got 3 of them on his website, and you can go to www.catalystconsultinggroup.org. And the title of the 3 books that we briefly went over that he has, and you can go find them, and you can actually purchase them right off his website. Teams, who needs them and why? If you're trying to build your team at work, get your team, implement some plans and different things for your team. Corporate performance management and organization design. So, again, the title of the website is catalystconsultinggroup.org. That's our show for today. We'll catch you right back here this weekend on the Author Chat Show. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Bye.
For the next few seconds, all you will hear are the sounds of a farmhouse kitchen. These comforting sounds are brought to you by Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Bread. You see, our farmhouse bread recipe started out much the same way as your homemade bread, with a baker, a kitchen, and a small batch. Our bread is always slow-baked with deliberate, thoughtful care, because at Pepperidge Farm, we believe slow is good. For the next few seconds, you'll hear nothing but the sounds of a farmer walking through a field of oats. These sounds are brought to you by Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Bread. You see, life on a farm moves at its own pace, because everything worth doing takes time. That's why our bakers slow bake our farmhouse oatmeal bread with thoughtful care, so our famous farmhouse taste is baked into every slice. Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Oatmeal Bread. Slow is good.